All right, in this video we're going to discuss how to replace your rear fender. It's going to be pretty similar to the process that we followed for the front fender with a little bit of variation. So what we'll do is first we'll go over the tools that you're going to need to do this, and then we'll go through the step-by-step process so you can watch me do it, so you can do it yourself at home. So the first tool that we're going to need is a 10mm socket. We're going to use this 10mm socket to remove the rear brake pads. Next up, we will take a hex bit. So I have a 10mm Cobalt H10 hex bit, 10mm. This is going to be used to remove the bolt on either side of this rear tire. So if you remember, on the front tire, it's one continuous bolt that goes through the whole tire. But since this rear tire has the motor in it, we are not able to put a bolt all the way through it. So we have two separate bolts on either side. That's what we'll use the hex bit for. And then lastly, to remove the fender itself, once we've dropped this tire down, we'll be using an Allen bit to remove the 4 screws from the inside of the fender. So that's all the tools that you're going to need for this project. Let's move on to the step-by-step process. All right, so the first step in removing the fender is taking the rear brake pad off. So we're going to take our 10mm socket and we're going to remove the 2 screws that are located just right here on the brake pad. And then what I typically do is I'll take these screws out and I'll put the brake pad on the floorboard of the bike just to get it out of the way. That way I know where they're at and I don't have to go looking for them. All right, okay. Step 2 is going to be removing the bolts on either side of the tire. So we'll go ahead and start on this side. And I don't take it out all the way. I basically just loosen it up on each side. And then once they're both loosened up, I give it a once around, make sure that nothing's holding this tire up other than these bolts. And then I'll go ahead and unscrew them and drop the tire down. All right, so let's go ahead and drop this fender down. One thing to keep in mind when you're doing this is this tire has a cord that goes from the motor. It's a power cord that goes from the motor to the floorboard for power. Just make sure that it's not being held up by a zip tie. If it is, go ahead and snip that zip tie. That way it allows us to drop this tire down without it pulling on the frame itself. So we'll go ahead and drop this tire down. Now, you'll notice that this is a different process than the front tire. The front tire we could remove completely and put it to the side because it wasn't being held by any type of wire or anything like that. With this back tire, because of that power cord, we can't remove it and get it out of the way. It needs to kind of just stay in place. So we drop it down. We have plenty of room now to access these screws on the inside of the fender. So now we can get to work on removing this. Okay, so we'll go ahead and remove these screws on the inside of the fender. There's 2 on this side and 2 on this side. We'll go ahead and take these out now. I'm just using my Allen bit to do this. You want to be careful when you're doing this to be nice and easy with it because you don't want to strip the head of these screws. All right, so I've loosened these screws up and now I can just take them by hand, unscrew them by hand. Well, and then once I take these out, I'll do the same thing that I did with the front fender where you're going to take these wings and you're going to pinch them in, and then this time I'm just going to lift up and then rotate it, and then we're out. So now that we've taken the yellow fender off and we're going to put this new blue fender on the back of the bike, the process is the exact same process, just in reverse, right? So we're going to go ahead and put this fender on. We're going to screw it in with the 4 screws that we just took out. Then we're going to raise the tire. We're going to screw it in with the bolts. And then we're going to put the brake pad on and we'll be done. So right now I'll go ahead and put this blue fender on. Again, pinching in on these wings and then putting in from the top and rotating down. and lining these holes up on this fender with the holes that are on the bike itself. And then you'll see what I do is I get these screws started, and then I'll adjust this fender as needed to make sure that we're getting enough clearance so that it doesn't rub on this back tire. It's a simple process, doesn't take a whole lot of time. You really just need the right tools, and you can get this done no problem. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead, now that they're in there, I'll tighten them up. I like to snug them up. I don't like to be too aggressive when I'm tightening these bolts or these screws, just because you can easily strip one of the heads on these. So like I said, just snug it up. I'm kind of holding it in place so that the front edge of this fender is touching this rubber gasket that we have on the back of the floorboard here. That's usually a good sign that your fender's in the proper position. Again, just snugging these screws up and double checking that my front fender is in a good spot. Looks like it's touching. That's it, we're ready to put the tire on. If you watch the front tire or the front fender video where we replaced the front fender, you'll remember that we had two spacers on either side of the tire. We don't have that on this rear tire. We have two stems that basically come out of the wheel, and these stems basically are just going to line up with the holes on either side of this bike. And what I'll show you here in a second as I raise this bike up is the stem on the right side of the bike, if you're facing the rear, has a channel. So you can see this stem is square, and you can move this stem freely. There's a channel on the inside here that it needs to fit into. That basically prevents this from spinning when the tire gets going. So it holds this in place. It's going to fit inside this groove here. Once we get this in the groove, we want to make sure that this power cord is going forward. We don't want it on the back side because it'll wrap around and that'll be an issue. So as long as this is going to fit in this groove and this power cord is going forward, we're good. So I'll go ahead and put this tire up. All right, so now I have this stem fit into this groove, and I can go ahead and screw it in. And it should screw in easy like this, right? So as long as it's not in a bind, this screw you can tighten up with your hand for the most part. You'll notice that it's in this groove, no problem, and this power cord is going forward, so I know that's good. Then I'll come in on this other side. This other side doesn't have a channel. It just basically lines up with this hole. And again, this screw, as long as this tire is not in a bind, it'll screw right in, no problem. So I can just do like this, and now I'm ready to use my hex bit, my 10mm Cobalt H10 hex bit, and I'll tighten this up. And so what I do, I keep saying this, but I snug this up because I don't want to over tighten, and then I'll give it a couple good cranks by hand. That way I know I'm not doing any damage to the bolts or anything like that. All right, okay, so now that we have tightened up our rear tire, so we've got our fender on, we've got our tire on, this power cord now, sometimes depending on your bike, you're either going to have just a power cord or you're going to have a power cord and you're also going to have your rear tail light wire coming down, and they're going to basically come down and meet right here on this inner lip of the piping. What I like to do is we're going to use zip ties to secure this wire to the pipe itself. That ensures that this wire isn't going to be loose. If it's loose, it could get caught in on this tread, whether you have a knobby or whether you have a street or whatever the case may be. It could get caught in here, and that could cause issues as well. So you want to make sure, it looks like this already has one wire here, but you want to make sure that you have probably two, one at the curve here and then one just on the inside of this frame, this rear part of the frame. If you have that and this is secure to the pipe, then you're all set. Just be mindful of that before you move on to putting the brake pads on. Okay, so let's go ahead and put this brake pad on. It's real simple. We're just going to line these two holes up. I get my 2 screws. And then I'll grab my 10mm socket wrench. That's it. We've replaced the fender, we've got the tire and the brakes back on. You're ready to hit the road again.